BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Tuesday, and on Tuesdays this year I've been talking to you guys about the story of JonBenet Ramsey, perhaps the most famous unsolved mystery in American history. And in this episode, I will be looking at John Ramsey, her father, as a possible suspect in her murder. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the story of JonBenet Ramsey. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Blackbox Ned. Some of you were wondering about a recent poll that I put out about some ideas for a future episode about JonBenet, and why Burke Ramsey and Patsy Ramsey weren't more frequently discussed as suspects here on this channel, and the short answer is that I've made episodes about both of them in the past, but I'm not open to discussing material or theories that would involve Patsy and Burke in future episodes. But today's episode has a very simple motivation. I've never done a direct episode that has explored John Ramsey as a possible suspect, so that's what has brought us here today. And you guys know about my personal theories, which I've shared in other episodes, but I've also been rethinking the case in certain ways, which I will share with you throughout the duration of this episode, and I will also be looking at some comments from Dr. Cyril Wecht, who wrote the book Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey, as well as also going very, very public with accusations against John Ramsey. But if we're going back to December 26 of 1996, Patsy Ramsey claims that she was awakened. She woke up, she went to the bathroom, then she went downstairs, and she found a 2.5-page ransom note that said that JonBenet was missing, and that they demanded $118,000 in ransom. Then Patsy Ramsey goes back, she calls the police, she talks to John, she calls 911, but you guys know the story. Then the police come, they don't find JonBenet's body until about 1 in the afternoon. And all the events that I just described should have taken place from approximately 5:30 in the morning all the way up until 1 in the afternoon. Detective Linda Arndt was the first person who was on the scene, and she has not publicly stated this, but it appears that she believes that John Ramsey was the person who was responsible for his daughter's murder. And some of this relates to his behavior on the day, December 26 of 1996. Detective Linda Arndt states that she first thought that John Ramsey was being very cordial, but then, at one point during the day, it's almost as if his personality just changed and he looked her dead in the eyes, and she could almost see the mask slipping away, and something very devious seemed to be going on. Now, that is her interpretation of the events in a way that she related. But John Douglas has talked about this in his book, The Cases That Haunt Us, and he said that not liking the way that somebody looked at you is not evidence, and that's also not something that you can log into evidence. Because this is an episode where we are exploring John Ramsey's culpability in the murder of his daughter, I would actually provide a rebuttal to that. There's an almost identical story in the book The Sociopath Next Door by Dr. Martha Stout, where a wife is interacting with her own husband, and she has that exact same moment. It's called lowering the mask. It's a metaphor for somebody revealing that they actually have a sinister core personality, and they are revealing something new about themselves. The other signs of guilt in the case indicate that John Ramsey did not seem surprised when nobody called to try and claim this $118,000 ransom note between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. He also deviated from the instructions of the ransom note, calling multiple people and, just violating absolutely everything that the alleged kidnappers claimed that they wanted to do. He denies this, but it was reported by Detective Linda Arndt that he left the house for an hour to try and get the mail. And his excuse for this was he was saying that he thought there might be some type of letter that was sent by the kidnappers. And John Ramsey was accused of this on Crime Junkie, and he said, no, it wasn't an hour, it was a much smaller amount of time than that. But at the same time, why not still sit by the phone expecting a call from the kidnappers? Are these not other suspicious things? To the people who think that the Ramseys were involved, they're just all looking at this stuff and saying, yeah, that's because he's guilty. He already knew that JonBenet was dead. He already knew that the ransom note was a dud. And this is the stuff, though, that I think is so much more powerful. What I've just shared with you is a very basic retelling of the theory that involves John Ramsey. But I'm going to share something with you now, and I'm now going to do disclaimers on Black Box Online Radio because the subject material for these episodes is very graphic, and it's going to be very simple. And that is that John Ramsey has also been accused of possibly sexually abusing his daughter. And this is some stuff that, I'm even choking up a little bit because I don't even want to say these things out loud. But John Ramsey said something that really bothered me in the interview that he did with Barbara Walters. And that is that you don't just become a killer. You don't just become a child molester. And what I was thinking was, yeah, you do. The first time has to occur at some point. Before that day they were not a killer, the next day they are. Before that day they were not a molester, the next day they are. And if John Ramsey was the person who murdered his daughter, I will even throw it out there. He is the only member of the Ramsey family that would have had explanations for striking her in the head, strangling her, and writing the ransom note. The only person, not Patsy and not Burke. Any theory involving Patsy and Burke could be explained just by calling 911 and saying, oh, the girl hit her head on something, and they call an ambulance, and the rest would have played out in some way. Maybe some investigation would have occurred, but with John Ramsey, he would have specific motivations to lie and specific motivations to cover up his actions, which is what I'm going to talk to you about right now. And it's very simple. Patsy Ramsey goes to sleep. John Ramsey goes out into the hallway of the second floor of the Ramsey house, and he sits down on the rug for a second, and he's listening to make sure that Burke and Patsy do not wake up, particularly Patsy. Then he gets JonBenet out of bed. This is December 25th going into December 26th. He tells JonBenet that he wants her to come downstairs with him, and that he wants to show her something Christmas-related. And she agrees, because, he is her father. They're going downstairs. And then JonBenet says, wait, Daddy, I want to get some pineapple. Because Burke left a bowl of pineapple on the table. She grabs one piece of pineapple and eats it. Then they go downstairs to the basement. This is when John begins something very bad to JonBenet again. I don't even want to say it, but he starts touching her inappropriately. And maybe at first she's receptive, but he starts touching her with the paintbrush, the same paintbrush that would be used in the garrote to strangle her. And again, first she seems very confused, then, ultimately, she's resisting, she's rejecting, she's even just trying to run away, she's trying to almost fight back, and at that point, John just retaliates, and he hits her. He hits his own daughter with something, a blunt object. It could have been the flashlight. It could have been something like a mallet. An aluminum bat has also been proposed, but I don't really think it was an aluminum bat. Then he realizes that he's done something terrible, and he needs to do something. He has to think quickly. He has to react. And his ultimate plan was that if he does anything verbally or publicly or tells the truth in any single way, he is going to jail. Not only for abusing his daughter, but also potentially for murder. So he staged the scene to make it look like a kidnapping, or to look like a botched kidnapping, let's be very clear, because JonBenet is left in the house, and this would also include writing the ransom note, specifically trying to forge Patsy's handwriting. And this is another thing that I heard from somebody else. I wish I could remember the name of the channel, or else I would just cite the source, but what they claim was that the number 118,000 was from John Ramsey's bonus from Access Graphics. And it was probably just a number that he had in the back of his mind. It was a number that he thought about regularly. John Ramsey also stated that that number was posted on his pay stubs. So he could have just been, thinking a large amount of money is $118,000. You wouldn't think that. I wouldn't think that. But somebody who sees that on their pay stub regularly and knows about what their bonus is just going to put that in the ransom note. Then He staged the scene, and that thing that Detective Linda Arndt is talking about is somewhat legitimate. He just realized for a second, oh no, I think she's onto me. And she has that moment where he is just looking like exactly what it's called, lowering the mask. Now that is one scenario. Here's a supporting piece of evidence. Why did John Ramsey go out to get the mail? Because of two major reasons. First, after he hit JonBenet with the blunt object, whatever it may be, he perhaps wanted to use that as an opportunity to destroy the murder weapon, to throw it away. Maybe he left it behind and just cleaned it with bleach or something, although I don't know if that actually happened. That's almost getting too extreme in terms of micromanaging a hypothesis. But he's trying to destroy something else, and that would be the head of the paintbrush that was used to touch JonBenet. The garrote that was used to strangle JonBenet was made from Patsy's paintbrush, and the head of the paintbrush, they believe, was inserted inside her as a type of sexual act. After Jean allegedly hit JonBenet, then he was just so disgusted with the paintbrush, he genuinely had a moment of, oh no, what have I done? I don't think for a second, in the scenario that I've created, that John Ramsey would have intended to kill her. Again, this is a type of sexual abuse that has gone wrong. He hits her with a blunt object, and she is just completely incapacitated. He's disgusted by what he's done. He's disgusted with looking at the paintbrush, so he decides to use that as something to tie into a garrote. Now, John was ex-Navy. He did work with the Subic Bay Training Center, as people have, informed me in the comments section. You guys are great. And the ransom note said SBTC. That could be something that refers to his Navy days. But more importantly, in the Navy, he would be much more familiar with knots. And also, John was a sailor, so he would have been familiar with knots too. Now, somebody once said that John, Patsy, and Burke would have all been familiar with tying knots because of sailing. I can accept that, but one thing I cannot accept is that Burke tied the garrote himself. People are like, Burke could have learned how to do that in the Cub Scouts. Cub Scouts learned how to make those things. I was a Cub Scout. I'm an Eagle Scout. No, we don't. Absolutely not. I just think that it's utterly impossible for a Cub Scout to tie something that complex. I mean, I'm not perfect with everything. I don't remember it all completely. I've made some mistakes talking about knots on the channel in the past, but at the same time, I do swear to you that in my entire time with the Boy Scouts, all the way up to Eagle, I never learned how to tie a garrote to strangle someone, and we also don't make things that look like that. Just saying, my 2 cents. But somebody who is, again, familiar with tying knots for sailing, as well as learning things in the Navy, might be familiar with that stuff. So Burke didn't tie the garrote. I'm just putting that out there. John Ramsey could have tied that, strangled JonBenet, because he would be the person who cannot just call 911, provide an explanation. I mean, he would be immediately caught and busted, because JonBenet was not only hit, she was also molested. He would have been going to jail unless he staged the scene to cover it up. Okay, now this is coming to the absolute biggest piece of evidence, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to make this episode. John Ramsey comes back from looking for the mail. They still haven't found JonBenet yet. Detective Linda Arndt asked them to search the house. She tells them to search from top to bottom, go up to the attic and search downward. John deviates from this instruction because what I thought about could have possibly happened was, while John was out, destroying the head of the paintbrush, and maybe tampering with the murder weapon, he could have had the idea, oh no, they're going to find my fingerprints on the duct tape that was put over JonBenet's mouth. Because, if it's on the outside of the duct tape, well, it was duct tape that was in his house. He can always just say something like that. I mean, you touch things in your house, I touch things in my home. But if it's on the underside of the duct tape, then that is something that he would not be able to explain. Or at the very least, that's the way that he's thinking. So he's thinking, I have to get to JonBenet first. I have to pull the duct tape off, because then they can't question me about fingerprints, also contaminating the crime scene, anything about fingerprints, shoe marks, all of that. If he finds JonBenet first, he just has this this epiphany moment that he needs to be the one to find the body. So when Detective Linda Arndt says search the house, he goes straight for the basement, he goes straight for the wine cellar, and Lawrence Schiller even talks about this in Perfect Murder, Perfect Town when JonBenet is found. John Ramsey pulls the duct tape off first, and then he goes for the restraints on her arms, and then he brings her upstairs and he says, "This had to have been an inside job. She was found in the wine cellar." Nobody knew about the wine cellar other than the family. So, then, JonBenet is upstairs, a blanket is covering her, and again, that contaminates the crime scene. A crime contaminates the forensic material, as terrible as that is to talk about JonBenet in that way, but that's ultimately what happened. That's why this case went unsolved. No matter whom your suspect is, whether it's one of the Ramseys or an intruder, that's why this case has gone unsolved, is because the authorities botched the investigation, because they allowed the crime scene to have been contaminated. And in the early segments of the series, I read so many other investigators giving their own outside takes on the subject, saying, this is not police procedure. They should have kept the Ramseys in one location. No one should be going out to get mail. Nobody should be going down into the basement by themselves. They should have stayed in one place, and other members of law enforcement should have done the searching throughout the house because of this exact reason. But then, John Douglas, the FBI profiler, again, who wrote about this in The Cases That Haunt Us, said very clearly, like, this is his strongest piece of evidence that should exonerate the Ramseys, that John Ramsey pulled the duct tape off of JonBenet's mouth before the body was found. And he asked a question to the readers. Why stage the crime scene and then unstage it before Detective Linda Arndt could have seen it? And, it just hit me once. I don't know if I was sitting on the couch or I was out taking a walk. It was about 2 weeks ago when I just had that moment like, well, somebody would do that if they suddenly thought, oh, my fingerprints are going to be on the underside. I better get there first so that they can provide explanations for not only the fingerprints, but anything and all things in terms of physical evidence that were on JonBenet's body when she was found. Okay, so this is something, though, that I think should not be easily dismissed, but of course you might be thinking about something else. If you have a roll of duct tape, or any type of tape in your house, I think we've all had that experience where you pull out too much, so then you wind it up again, and you roll it back up, and perhaps you could always have some explanation about how you touched duct tape or any type of tape in your own house and your fingerprints are on the other side. I would expect that a defense attorney could dismantle that, but this isn't about what attorneys are thinking. This is about what somebody who committed a crime was thinking and how he's trying to cover his tracks. Alright, so you just heard everything that I've been thinking about in regards to John Ramsey being guilty, and I also want to be very clear. I am open to possibilities. I don't even endorse that theory, but everything that I just shared is arranging a sequence of events, and it's something that I wanted to run by you guys. Now we're going to listen to something else, and this is a clip that is from Dr. Cyril Wecht, who wrote the book Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey. Dr. Cyril Wecht has been mentioned on this channel before, and he consulted with Randy Williams on the Jack the Ripper case, and Randy Williams wrote a book called Sherlock Holmes and the Autumn of Terror. And I've mentioned his comments on Ripper Wednesday. Every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper here on BBOR. And I've also talked about Dr. Cyril Wecht in the past when I did the episode called The Mind of O.J. Simpson, because he was very influential in investigations into concussion research and CTE. And the Mind of O.J. Simpson episode not only talked about O.J., but also about the story of Philip Adams, the NFL player that murdered 6 people in one night, and even the movie Concussion with Will Smith. But I'm going to play a clip that he did on the Drunken Bros podcast, and then this is something where he is just laying out his theory about what happened to JonBenet. And to his credit, he is not hiding, he's not holding anything back, he's just telling the audience, this is what I think, I'm not afraid of a lawsuit, and for better or for worse, here's Dr. Cyril Wecht, and let's respond.
A mystery for a long time with JBR.
Yeah.
I had watched the latest documentary that was out on ABC that happened that everybody got sued for because they speculated that
they accused Burke, the brother. Yeah.
Correct. Yes. In your knowledge, I'm not going to ask if you believe it. I don't want you hit with a lawsuit as well, obviously.
I'll tell you what I believe because it's in my book. Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey? Get the book, written by me. Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey? This was not a murder. This was well, technically it would be manslaughter, whatever, but it wasn't designed to be a murder. It was an accidental death that occurred during sexual play by the father. There was no intruder. No intruder. When you see me next and I have hair down to my waistline, like some of the NFL football players do, that's when the intruder will be found. John, this is a game. Patsy Ramsey, the mother, was out of the sex business, stage 4 ovarian cancer. She followed surgery, radiation, chemotherapy. The little girl was the surrogate. And the father, penile penetration, not penile penetration, I mean non-penile penetration, finger penetration, digital penetration. It's all there in the autopsy. Chronic inflammation, focal erosion, the vaginal vault, the 7 o'clock position, birefringent material, the most common source of which in any household is talcum powder. Put it all together. And then you have this cockamamie note, we represent a small foreign faction.
It was the weirdest note of all time.
$118,000. You like that number? Is exactly the bonus that John Ramsey received the year before.
Yeah, for Christmas.
Not 100, not 200, $118,000. And by the way, he forgot to bring pen and paper, but no problem. In the middle of the night, he finds pen and paper. He starts to write it. He writes. He doesn't like the beginning, but crumbles the paper, throws it down, and then starts to write again. You like that? And then he leaves the house. And by the way, he knew about the room in the basement. The homicide detective is getting there at 6 o'clock in the morning. Never even knew that room existed.
Yeah.
Looking for the 6-year-old girl, never even knew that room was there. A maid who worked there for 6 months never knew about that room. But this outside intruder who was able to get in without awakening anybody, he knew about that room where he took the little girl and he had his way and then he left.
Well, usually people who do home invasion spend a lot of time down at the city clerk's office looking up the blueprints of all the houses in the area, right?
Yeah.
Or is that not how it works? Like, we expect these James Earl Ray, all these low-level knucklehead criminals to
figured out that room.
They're like criminal masterminds all of a sudden. It's easier to believe they're a criminal mastermind than it is to believe that the government was somehow involved. Now, speaking of...
Well, real quick, how did the murder then occur with JonBenet Ramsey? Wasn't she hit with a blunt object in the back of the head? So the father did...
She was hit, but that did not kill her. She had 7 cc's of blood. You know, that's 1.5 teaspoons, 7 cc's. If somebody comes up right now, even with your hat on, sir, or my bald head, and hits us with an object, you're going to have a lot more bleeding. You're going to have subdural hemorrhage. You don't die right away. You don't die immediately. My son's a neurosurgeon. He operated on these people hours after the bleeding has occurred. That bleeding was already caused when she was dead or dying. There was no actual active bleeding. That was just oozing from a little bit of gravitational flow from some small vessels. She was already dead.
Strangled?
She had her collar up. The rope was around the neck. Make sure that there are no marks on the neck. The collar, the rope came down. The sleeve was pulled down. Make sure that it never touched the skin, so there would be no indication of this. And then when you tie something around someone's neck, then you can inadvertently get a vagal reflex. The vagus nerve, the 10th of 12 cranial nerves coming out from the brain, one on the right, one on the left, sends fibers into the chest, controls the heart, controls the lungs. When you apply pressure to the neck, that vagal reflex can lead to bradycardia, slowing down of the heart, and then you get cardiorespiratory arrest. That is what led to the death of JonBenet Ramsey. As I say, a horribly horrible death, but by no means an intended murder. And I don't say this in any way to get John Ramsey off the hook, but to point out exactly what happened. So that's JonBenet Ramsey.
Yes, and with that, because the mother is now deceased, he's still alive, and then the brothers, filed 1 million lawsuits against this. So, if you're the brother, does he know what happened? And if so, why isn't he coming forward and saying anything?
I don't think he knows what happened. In fact, when he awakened and he came down, and John Ramsey was on the phone with a relative in California, and you hear him saying to Burke, "Just go back to your room." John Ramsey, Burke, 9-year-old, 3 years older. He came down and he was trying to find out what happened. No, I don't think that Burke had anything to do with it. I do not believe so. I think Patsy obviously came to learn about it. And what was she going to do? She already lost her daughter. She's going to lose her husband. She's dying of cancer. She got a son. So I go along with it. And that's what I believe happened. And it's set forth in my book, Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey?
And one more time, those were the words of Dr. Cyril Wecht, where he was laying out his theory about what happened to JonBenet Ramsey. And he more or less says something very similar to what I just laid out in the preceding material. But ultimately, I think the biggest difference is that he was saying that he thought that there was some type of long-term abuse that had been going on. He could be completely right. He is a medical doctor, and I am not. The challenge to that is that JonBenet's pediatrician did not report any signs of physical abuse, or physical abuse or sexual abuse, but Dr. Cyril Wecht seems to have seen something in the autopsy that he thinks that the pediatrician may have missed. You heard that line very clearly about how he thought that John Ramsey liked to touch his daughter because he could no longer touch his wife, that she would experience a lot of pain because of her cancer treatments, so he started touching JonBenet. Absolutely horrible, an absolutely horrible thing to even conceptualize. But that is something that has been discussed in this episode. And, I completely follow his train of thought. I follow his reasoning. But when he said that this was a case of manslaughter, I think that perhaps he was talking about something rather similar to what I said, where he was trying to do an act to JonBenet, and it went too far. He wasn't intentionally planning on murdering her that night. It's just he responded that way by attacking her, or not even attacking her, retaliating. He just reacted in a way by hitting her on the head, and he perhaps was intentionally planning on strangling her or touching her in some type of inappropriate way. That's what Dr. Wecht is saying. That is rather different than what I laid out. What I laid out was that the hit was not planned, the strangulation was not planned, the restraints were not planned. All of that was done simply because he hit his daughter too hard, or he just hit her because he didn't want her to tell anyone about the abuse, and then he recognized that he had done something terrible. Overall, though, I think Dr. Cyril Wecht heavily challenged the intruder theory, saying that somebody in that situation grabbed the pen and paper from the house, they returned the pen to the cup where it was found, and also that the intruder was somebody who should not have known about the wine cellar. And that guy's even joking about saying, when people are going to commit a crime, are they looking up blueprints of a house? And if I can give my own honest pushback about that, the wine cellar really doesn't strike me as anything too odd. What struck me as odd was the comment that John Ramsey made. Because, all an intruder would have to do is enter the house. They're alone in the house for 1 to 4 hours, so they literally would just walk around. They would literally just walk from point A to point B, and then they would have a look inside. Oh, hey, here's a small room in the back. This is where I'm going to do the deed. Okay, so, the reason why I'm giving pushback is I think that there is something that we can genuinely challenge about that theory. And also, it's good to be skeptical. John Ramsey is the subject of both claims that I laid out. Everything that I was thinking, what Cyril Wecht was thinking, and even what Detective Linda Arndt was thinking. But there can be inconsistencies and problems with each scenario. For me, I want you guys to lay out everything in the comment section. Tell me what is right, tell me what is wrong, tell me what makes sense to you. I would love to read your responses. And also, if you have anything that you are curious about in regards to the JonBenet case, any ideas for future episodes, I would love to read them too, and as always, you can hit the like button and subscribe one more time. But furthermore, I told you guys a couple weeks ago that I'm still going through the book Perfect Murder, Perfect Town by Lawrence Schiller. Very, very slowly. I'm a very slow reader. And in one of the chapters, they were talking about two things. One, John Ramsey's actions on the day that JonBenet went missing, and number two was Burke Ramsey's responses while being interrogated. This stuff was in the same chapter. So I was reading Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, and it tells the story of how John Ramsey had a private plane with 2 pilots, and when JonBenet went missing, he called the pilot and the co-pilot. He couldn't get in touch with the pilot, so he got in touch with the co-pilot, and he told them not only were they not going to be able to make the 7 a.m. flight on December 26th, but JonBenet had been kidnapped. Again, he deviated from the ransom note. And Lawrence Schiller, the author of Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, was openly asking the reader, well, now why would he inform the pilot and the co-pilot about this terrible event if he was instructed not to do so by the ransom note? And I don't think there's anything weird about that. I know I just made a case for John Ramsey being guilty, but I don't think there's anything weird about it. Because I was openly wondering that when I'm just reading this book and he tells a story about how the pilot and the co-pilot are going to be waiting at 7 a.m. I was just wondering, is anybody going to call them? I mean, again, I just think that that was pure instinct on anybody's part, no matter what scenario you're going with. Guilty or not guilty. Yes, they called the people who were going to fly the plane and tell them that they weren't going to be able to make the flight. Then Perfect Murder, Perfect Town goes on to the story of Burke Ramsey being interrogated. And this stuff was not exactly the most helpful, and Lawrence Schiller openly admitted that. He said that Burke Ramsey was not very responsive, he didn't really express a lot of emotions, but the child psychologist interpreted that not as being guilty or hiding anything, but being traumatized by the events of his sister. So what the psychologist and interrogator tried to do is get Burke to play games. I'm sure you've seen some of the interrogation footage where Burke looks like he has toys or games in front of him. And ultimately, he says something to the effect of he thinks that somebody hit JonBenet with a hammer. But Burke was mostly unresponsive in the interview, and the Boulder PD reviewed the footage over and over again, and they just couldn't determine anything. They couldn't tell if he genuinely didn't know anything or if he was lying. You heard in the clip from Dr. Cyril Wecht that he thought Burke had no idea. He thought that Burke was not involved with this. That, well, I mean, halfway the scenario that I created and Dr. Cyril Wecht's scenario are the same. That there was some type of sexual abuse that took place. JonBenet didn't participate, and then John Ramsey hit her with something to silence her and realized he went too far, so he staged the scene as a cover-up and made it look like a botched kidnapping. He also took very, very calculated steps to contaminate the crime scene. And, I mean, if we're going to listen to Detective Steve Thomas, who also wrote the book JonBenet, he was somebody who said that John Ramsey kept a copy of the book Mindhunter by John Douglas on his nightstand. And I had thought that that had been debunked, but when I picked up not Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, when I picked up The Cases That Haunt Us once again, it turns out that John Douglas only believed that that was debunked. He examined John Ramsey's books and he didn't find a copy of Mindhunter, and he also went through the evidence logs, and the book Mindhunter was never logged into evidence. Well, that just means that John Ramsey could have removed it. Let's just leave it at that. But John Douglas also stated that Mindhunter nor any of his books would actually be manuals on how to stage a crime scene. And an interesting fact, I bought the book, The Cases That Haunt Us, after I learned that the serial killer Rex Heuermann, aka the Long Island serial killer, allegedly, was in possession of the book, The Cases That Haunt Us by John Douglas. And some people were wondering if that was something that he could use as a type of manual to commit crimes. I've read the book, I've read all the stories, and I've talked about most of them here on Black Box Online Radio. Everything except the Lizzie Borden chapter. I read it, but I haven't talked about it on BBOR. And I don't see how you could use that as a way to learn how to commit crimes, learn about profiling, sure, but it's not a manual on this is how you commit a crime and how you get away with it. Just my take on the subject. But I would love to know what you guys think. Please share anything that you want in the comments section down below, and just to provide some challenges to John Ramsey as a suspect. You have the DNA question, that's one thing, and giving a shout out to Dr. Casbah, who left lots of comments on last week's episode, and Dr. Casbah is also running his own YouTube channel where he is talking about the JonBenet Ramsey case as well as other true crime cases, but JonBenet is a very big topic for his YouTube videos, and he just stated that nobody could write that ransom note under duress after they had murdered a child. I mean, we're talking about shaking hands, maybe tears, depending on their psychological state, and then that would point towards somebody who wrote that ahead of time. Dr. Todd Grande also said that in his psychological profile, although he did implicate the Ramseys as guilty, but he said the same thing. It's very odd for somebody to write that ransom note after the child was already dead. And, I mean, this can also just come down to the fact that either John Ramsey's the greatest liar in the world, or he's guilty. Or he's not guilty. Not guilty, excuse me. Totally butchered that. That's actually a quote from the Cases That Haunt Us. Either you're the best liar in the world, or you're innocent. And totally butchered that one. But what do you guys think? Do you think that John Ramsey was responsible for the murder of JonBenet? If your suspect is Patsy or Burke, please tell me why. If your suspect was an intruder, please tell me why. What is wrong with the scenarios that you've heard? How much weight do you put in Detective Linda Arndt's assessment of John Ramsey's personality? Do you think that he was suspicious for a good reason, or do you think that she's just way off the mark? Please share anything you want in the comments section down below. You guys know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. And you can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is Ned DeHaan. There's also BlackboxNed88 on Facebook. And I use this to release shorts and reels Monday through Friday here on BBOR, in addition to the regularly scheduled lineup. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com. buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. And that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. That's all for me now, and I'll see you tomorrow for an episode about Jack the Ripper. Until next time.